Hey, everybody, and welcome back to episode 13 of Backs of All Trades podcast. I'm back today with another guest. This is Zach Schenken. He's a 24-year-old creative entrepreneur. He is the founder of the Vitruvian Program, which is a program centered around self-mastery and more of a holistic view of success and everything that really is part of that, a lot of which is ignored in today's things like fitness and, spirituality and other things like that. We actually met here at Tech. So we are currently in one of the academic buildings at both of our alma maters at Georgia Tech, and we met through Greek life. And we'll go into that a little bit later. But Zach, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show.
Dude, of course. I was super excited. Obviously, you do so well with socials and like sharing your life. Like I told you, I didn't know you were posting content until something came on my explore page, and then I saw went on your page and you said you were back in Atlanta, and I likewise was here to visit family in this kind of holiday season we find ourselves in. So I shot a quick DM, and I'm glad you were so open to sharing your platform, your audience. And I think it's going to be a really, really interesting conversation, because especially how we met, the context is very interesting, and then certainly finding ourselves totally independently in similar fields is really fascinating to me.
No, completely agree. But I want to ask you, because my audience, there's a good chance they don't know you. And so how do you introduce yourself when you're meeting someone at a cocktail party or an event?
Yeah, that's been an interesting one over the last year to continue to develop and flesh out, but I've had to do it meeting a lot of people, especially over the last 3 months or so as I've been traveling. So yeah, like you said, I'm the founder of the Vitruvian. In that, or amongst that kind of company or conglomerate or umbrella, falls the Vitruvian podcast, which, similar to yourself, I love having fascinating conversations with really cool people. I also do solo episodes where I kind of share my thoughts and learnings, but it's just a really amazing way to connect with really smart minds and get into rooms that you have no business being in. Just you're one message away from sitting down with somebody that you really admire doing really cool work all over the world. So that's the podcast. It's centered around self-mastery. I leave that open because it is really just exploring my curiosity and this thing we call life, and whether it is the very carnal, the physical aspect, training, nutrition, etc., but also the spiritual mindset, philosophy, all that stuff. And similar to your I assume the Backs of All Trades name comes from that kind of same mindset, right? So the Vitruvian itself takes its name from the Vitruvian Man sketch from Leonardo da Vinci. For those wondering, it's the man in the circle in the square, the arms outstretched. I always took a tremendous amount of inspiration from the Renaissance period of art, Leonardo specifically kind of defining the Renaissance man, not just being a fine artist, but also an inventor, an anatomist, a botanist, a philosopher, all these things. Similarly to myself, I was always a strangely shaped peg with no specific hole to go into. So even choosing to go to a university like this was a hard decision for me. They send the smart kids to engineering school, so it's why I ended up coming here. But I did have a hard time making that call, because at the same time where I was capable of physics, calculus, engineering, I also liked history, writing essays, literature, etc. So full circle now to what I do, I've been able to reintegrate that half of my brain versus the time at Tech was very analytical and computational. I know I'm wandering a bit. Apologize. But yeah, so that's what I do with the Vitruvian is the podcast. And then like you alluded to, I have a 12-week self-mastery program for men to become the most confident, fit, and high-performing versions of themselves. You can check out the vitruvian.co if you want more copy surrounding the exact stuff that I do. Shoot me a message on any platform, but that's how I'll kind of open it up.
Yeah, no, I will put all of your links in the description as well. I think that's awesome. And I think I share a lot of the same mindsets when it comes to, I think that especially coming to an engineering school like Georgia Tech, there is kind of the understanding that you are somewhat single faceted, right? That you are really good at math, really good at science, and perhaps maybe not the most social, not the most confident, or other areas of your life are lacking fitness and all those things. And so I always felt a little bit, pigeonholed in a way. I want to go into a little bit of actually how we met, because I think it's a hilarious story. And so we were both in Greek life. We were in different fraternities, and we were actually presidents of arguably, and it sounds funny to say at the time, but rival fraternities. Fraternities will have intra-fraternity beef sometimes. And I remember distinctly we have cameras set up outside of our house, and oftentimes fraternities will, prank other fraternities or do different things. And a couple individuals from your fraternity, younger guys, had come over and put instant mashed potatoes on our lawn. If you don't know that sort of prank, essentially, if it rains or if there's sprinklers come on, the dried mashed potato powder will turn into mashed potatoes, and then additionally egged our house. And we caught them on cameras. And you had recently come into your presidency. I had recently come into mine, and I texted you, and I actually really respected the way that you handled it. And I think that it was very cordial, and I don't know what went on internally, but I do know that they came to essentially, clean up, apologize. And I think that as a leader, that obviously reflects on you very positively. And similarly, it probably reflected negatively on you when they first came out and did it. So it's interesting at such a young age to be in a role where your reputation is so dependent on how you are as a leader. I don't know if you have anything specifically on that story, but that's how I remember it, at least.
No, yeah. I mean, I think you tell it very objectively, so I appreciate not coloring it with that any sort of bias. I'll obviously apologize again, even though like you alluded to, it was out of my hands, and I'm sure you experienced it as well. Like when you tell people that you're the president, like they assume that there's some sort of like clout or benefit that comes with that position, and legitimately outside of putting it on your resume, it is a completely thankless job because you kind of play the enemy to your own people because you're kind of like trying to be the last bastion of structure and rules to this unruly group of young men. And then on the flip side of that, like when your fraternity becomes a scapegoat on campus for X, Y, and Z reason, then the school's breathing down your neck and you're the first kind of like pillar that they're reaching out to. So I'm sure you experienced the same thing. I mean, that was unfortunately for me, not the first fire I had to put out like in the first week of presidency, but it was not maybe the best way to be introduced to one another, but I likewise, I think you handled it really well. We obviously took care of what we needed to internally, spoke to those guys, like kind of the hard part, I think, and I'll be interested to hear like how you kind of experienced it as well, but like motivating or like getting everyone to be pointed in the same direction when everybody has like such diversified interests, levels of maturity, personal development, buy-in to the cause, if you will. It was just very hard, like over the entire presidency, but especially in stuff like that, where there's kind of like, the boys will be boys. Like they're just kids doing dumb shit, which I think is a fun part of college. But at the same time, like there are rules for a reason. So yeah, it was just definitely a very interesting way to connect initially.
Yeah, no, I've talked at lengths about fraternity and particularly being fraternity president. I think that it has helped me a lot in a number of ways. And I actually had on Lucas Pachter 2 weeks ago now, and he was also the president of his fraternity. And so I don't want to talk, the one word I'll say about it, because I've talked about it a lot, is I think that it did kind of teach me leadership of some sort of form or fashion in what I would call a sandbox, because there's no real risks. Like yes, your reputation on the college campus is on the line. But I went to a president's conference, and what I remember very distinctly is he said, this is the position that you'll have the least power with the lowest risk, with the most responsibility, right? The least power because the constituents, your brothers, you're not their dad, you're not their boss. Like the only way that you can actually get them to align on that cause is if they feel like it's in their best interest, because again, you can't force them to do anything. The least risk because provided you're not doing anything really stupid, nobody's livelihood is messed up, right? You're not gonna have to fire people if you make a mistake and they're gonna have to go find another job. Or in the case of really extreme cases, like if you're a military general or a doctor, a mistake could cost someone their life, right? That's not gonna happen. And then what was the last one I said? The least power, the lowest risk. I don't recall.
The most responsibility.
The most responsibility, because everything does at the end of the day fall on your shoulders. You're the liaison for your fraternity to nationals, to the school, and obviously to a bunch of kids looking up to you. So I'm curious, what did you get out of the fraternity? But then a bit more specifically, what did you get out of being president?
Yeah, man. I mean, it's awesome to have this dialogue because there are so few people that get a window into it. Like I don't know if you've ever had the same hesitancy, but I'm always hesitant to even share I was in a fraternity. Nonetheless, the specific chapter itself, just knowing that everyone's experience is so different, university to university, chapter to chapter. So I don't want especially when I'm meeting people initially, their first kind of thing that they kind of anchor to me to be some sort of negative experience that I had no control over, like guys at another university, some other chapter that I had nothing to speak on. But that being said, like it was an unbelievable learning environment. Like you said, it was like a sandbox, and I felt like it was like everything in life. It was a fractal or like a microcosm of the macro. And we were in leadership positions in very interesting times. Like we had to navigate like COVID. I don't know if we're supposed to say the jab, like that period of time in human history is so unique. And so we had to, I'm sure the conversations behind your closed doors were very similar, but it was literally like watching the stuff you see on the news, but with, you know, the group of 20-something-year-old men. Like there's the camp over here saying that pro this, anti this, and you have to make policy, navigate those waters just the same way as in the real world. So very like interesting pseudo-social kind of observations. And you really did get to see like a lot of the really common psychology stuff that you read about, right? Like tragedy of the commons. Like if something is nobody's in specific, it's nobody's in total, and things kind of fall by the wayside. So learning about like what motivates people, human beings, where to be firm in your leadership, where to be kind of loose or lackadaisical. And then certainly like with everything that I talk about, like continuing to dive into like the world of the self and taking care of yourself as the priority. I think like honestly in the fraternity, like there's a reason that someone like yourself or someone like myself was chosen by the elected like conglomerate to lead. And I think a big part of that is how people viewed you, and that isn't to put myself on any sort of pedestal, but it's like the work that I did personally on myself. Like I think that discipline, the consistency, how I held myself as an individual pointed or encouraged people to be like, I want him to lead the direction of the chapter. And you don't just get in the position and then let that fall by the wayside. Like continuing to take care of yourself, carving out time for training, making sure your nutrition's on point, still sleeping amongst a massively pressured university and role and all these other things. So yeah, I mean, it was just like a really, really awesome opportunity that I'm still grateful for to this day, to be able to impact people's lives. I know we were just talking about like the younger members as well. Like that first class of people, like when you're a freshman, you're starry-eyed, you're coming in, like you look at the president of your organization as some sort of like God. I certainly did for the president who was when I was a pledge. And then to have that script flipped with my freshman class, my brother's freshman class coming in, and the way he tells me that his friends talk about me, it's very surreal. Like it doesn't feel almost even earned, but knowing that there was that amount of responsibility and impact on people's lives is really, really cool.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that this is something that is sort of changing in my head as we're talking, but also a little bit, is that I did, as I mentioned, talk to Lucas Pachter a couple weeks ago, who's a brand owner, but was also the president of his fraternity. And I think that there's a lot of common themes and shared qualities. And I think some of them were probably through life experience or the experience of the fraternity themselves, but we share a lot of similar things. And I'm wondering now if that's traits that we were either internal, inherent, cultivated similarly in other parts of our life, but how even after the fraternity, there's some common themes of where we all kind of ended up. And so I think that it's just an interesting note. I don't know if there's really a nugget to go off of there, but the types of people to where you and I, like you said, kind of ended up doing similar things on social media, putting our life out there. And not only that, but even hyper specific into like the self-improvement space and particularly targeting young men. And so I think that there's probably a common theme there that we could tease out.
I completely agree. And I mean, I don't believe in things like coincidence, like everything happens for a reason. And I do think that like it probably has to do with some like nugget or seed of that desire for like independence, control of your environment. Like I'm big on kind of designing and creating your own reality. And when you look at it in the fraternity context, like if you put yourself at the highest seat of leadership that is available to you, you kind of are the one curating that environment to some degree, right? Like there's frameworks you have to play in, whether it's from the university top down from your national organization, and then certainly the kind of body that you're serving ultimately. But you really like, for me, I don't like to be told what to do, and not in like the traditional like rebel sense, like free spirit, but I just genuinely like, I want to be in control of my life. And so that very much marries into leadership at the fraternity, which of course parlays into becoming an entrepreneur. And then we live in the period of history where the biggest lever you can pull on is media, and is social media. So that is the space that we've uniquely found ourselves in. And I think that it's really cool that we get to share our personal stories, because through that vulnerability, people out there can feel seen and heard and can place themselves in it and find those little like life lessons that are applicable to them.
That's amazing. That's a great segue into what I want to talk about next, which is you have taken a very non-traditional path following your degree from Georgia Tech at a premier institution. You studied biomedical engineering, essentially a title that most people would dream to have, to then go pursue a very traditional but great paying engineering job. You basically said, I'm not going to do that. And you have started your own company in a number of different ways to actually gain income and through that. And you actually just recently got back from Bali, where you were for a couple of months, which I want to discuss in a minute. But I think that I want to ask a bit more pointed question, which is, how do you feel as someone who is doing essentially what so many people dream to do? And I'm going to use the term escape the matrix. And I think that a lot of people want that and they idolize it, but without sort of the qualities that I think that you present and the actual work you did to get there. I think that people think it's either easy or that maybe they should do that, and actually their personality may indicate otherwise. And so I'm wondering how that journey has been for you. And obviously I'm sure there were times where you were a little iffy on it, or maybe you weren't, but I want to hear about your journey to actually saying, hey, I'm not going to take the 9 to 5. I'm going to go pursue my own thing.
Yeah, a lot to touch on there. And I'll start at least with kind of addressing the audience or the people that might like, hey, I want this non-traditional path. I want to work online. I want to be able to travel. I want to do X, Y, and Z. That is awesome. I'm extremely bullish, and like the nature of like the work that I do, the program that I've built, and the content is like curating a sense of heightened self-awareness, like making sure that what you want is what you want. And you're not a product of mimetic desire. You don't want to live in Dubai and drive the Rolls Royce because Iman Gadzhi does that. And you don't want to, have like supercars because Andrew Tate has them, but you actually intrinsically find those things valuable to you. Like there's nothing wrong with having any XYZ desire, even this sort of lifestyle that we're alluding to, but you need to make sure that it is suited to you, because what is suited to you may not be that. And ultimately, like, I think a lot of people place desires out into the future that if I get X, Y, and Z, then I'll be happy, or then I'll be fulfilled, then I'll be the person I want to be. But like, you can still be depressed in a Ferrari on the beach, whatever it may be. So I would just say, like, always assess who you are first, and then the external world will take care of itself. But for myself personally, I grew up kind of always knowing I wanted to be an entrepreneur. It was something that, while my dad did choose the traditional path for himself, and predominantly out of wanting to protect and provide for our family, which I'm eternally grateful for the life it provided, he always toted and talked about entrepreneurship as being something really, really special. He always kind of put forth these like big characters, whether it was through history or like Steve Jobs, who in our lifetime passed, but we got to see him while he was still alive, and just putting those people and like pedestalizing them and like what they were able to do and impact the world. I always thought of myself somehow fitting into that world. But as you also are aware, you can't check the box when you graduate, like entrepreneurship. You can't sign up, you can't apply to that. You have to build something. So I graduated with a biomedical engineering degree, took a job at a medical device startup, and then in parallel made an investment into like an online course mastermind that helped me facilitate building my online business. Did that in parallel for about 9 to 10 months. And then, as we were talking about coming in before this podcast, made the decision to make that leap to quit with about like 4 to 5 months of like savings and runway. And everyone's calculus for like their burning the boats moment. If you want to know more about my personal story, I did a podcast like called Burning the Boats, like talking about my specific mindset. But I think that it falls back on self-awareness. Like, what would my right time would be later than some, earlier than others. And the way that I'm choosing to live my life is a product of everything that's brought me here. And I've observed taking the safe route in my personal father and family's path, as well as other anecdotal experiences, as well as many content creators and podcasts, et cetera, like ad infinitum almost. I'm looking at that data set and saying, like, if I choose this path, the traditional whatever, I know where it can and would likely take me. I just didn't want the outcome, so I opted out of the game. I don't know that what I'm choosing to do now will give me the things that are on the vision board necessarily, or the goals that the 24-year-old version of me aims at. But I do know that playing a completely different game is likely to give me different outcomes. And so I was very risk prone in the traditional sense, but I was just very intentional with defining to myself what risk is. I have like tattooed on my arm, Memento Mori. It's the sign out of my podcast, the Latin phrase, remember that you will die. And to me, that meditation on death, reminding yourself that your time is not only finite, like it does have a fixed amount of time that you're here, but it's also not guaranteed. You know, like we're young men, we take care of our health. Ideally, we get a good amount of time more, right? At least double our lifespan, triple what we've lived so far. But it's not guaranteed that like we leave this podcast and I get hit by a stinger bus and I'm just toast, right? Like my story ends there. And knowing that, I like to lay my head to rest every single day, knowing, or at least being able to say to myself that I'm happy with not only how that day went, but like how my life was lived up until that point. And it came to the place where I was sitting day after day in that job, trying to build what I was on the side. And I was like, am I happy with how these days are going? Would I regret not taking the jump? So I made the leap, and it's been, I guess, almost a full calendar year since. So I haven't ended up in a van down by the river. It's working out as magically as I could have imagined. And so that's where we find ourselves today.
It's an amazing story. The one thing that I want to touch on, because I really agree with you, is I made a whole episode on my personal one about living with intent is what I call it. And essentially playing the game, which you did, which is let's play this out and let's say where this ends up, you know, and especially on the safe route, it's a bit more predictable, right? And so saying, you know, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, if I work my ass off and I succeed on the game that I'm playing, do I want that outcome? And if the answer is no, then you better make some shifts quickly because you're playing the wrong game. And so I think that a lot of people don't even do that due diligence, maybe because they've been told that end goal is what they want, or they just didn't put a lot of thought into it. And they're like, this is the safe path. And they just take the next step without ever looking in the distance. And I completely agree with that line of thinking of saying, hey, am I playing the right game? I like that you phrased it that way. I'll probably be borrowing on that in future episodes, but no, that's incredible. And then you recently went to Bali for a couple months to really pursue this thing and actually connect with other creators out there. And I don't know too much about what's going on out there. I know that co-working is huge out there, but I want to hear what that experience was like. What did you gain from it? And it sounds, you were telling me before the podcast that you plan on going back next year.
Yeah. So I kind of leading up to the trip was in this space where I had done a lot of like the back end. I had kind of framed my offer. I had revisited rebranded my website. I had done back end on how I was doing outreach, all these things kind of business wise. And I felt like everything was relatively set. But I still wasn't seeing kind of like, I guess, quantum leaps that I was looking for. And I knew that if I was going to make a big jump, it wasn't going to come from, you know, minimizing spend and just dragging out like the slow burn. Like I needed to make some sort of big shift. And I felt like that shift was in people. And I had connected with enough online creators that had at least recommended that Bali was on the list, and it had been there for a while. But I just had kind of this intuitive call, and like, I don't want people to lose me as like a woo-woo spiritual guru or anything, but I definitely have come into more of a nuanced experience of my intuition and God and spirituality in this last year. And I have no other way to say than I just felt like I should go. I didn't have anyone specifically I was going to see, but I knew that, like you alluded to, co-working's big, creative entrepreneurship is big. And additionally, lifestyle as well. Like I'm very big on kind of just healthy living, like being in the sun, touching the ground. I love to surf, all of those types of things. And that environment, it just essentially facilitates the life I want. And so even if I was the only one there, I'd probably have a decent time in that little block of sand, but it also so happens that a bunch of amazing people are there. So I decided on a pretty short notice to like book the ticket. And what was originally going to be a 1 month trip turned into 2. I had to leave because the visa only gives you 60 days before you have to leave and come back. Then I did a short stint in Australia, then went to Thailand after that, and now I'm back here. But the trip was amazing. I think it showed me, it helped expose a lot of like limiting beliefs for myself. Also be very empowering, like we were talking about, like when you step into something that is uncommon, especially being a creator, there's like 2 sides as I describe it. Like there's one that people are very familiar with the terminology, which is imposter syndrome. And the other side of that double-edged sword is identity lag. So imposter syndrome being you are worried about the opinions of other people pointing towards you. But pretty quickly in your creator journey, you get over that because it's like, fuck it. Like they're not thinking about me in the first place, but even if they are, they're not going to stop me from my dreams. But the kind of shady other side of that is the identity lag, where your internal brain doesn't know the new version of you yet. And you can't confidently look in the mirror and say, I am a content creator, or I am an online entrepreneur, or I am a fashion designer, or whatever the thing is for you. And that just takes time, right? You have to give your brain the new data set. So now it's like, this is what we do. We are no longer an engineer or a student athlete or whatever your former versions and identities were. But it was really awesome for me to start shedding those, because you're in an environment where so many people around you are doing the same thing. And you're like, it is normal. It is normal somewhere. And here is one of those places. It's not the only place. But I had spent like that first year very much like in the lab. Like I hate the kind of mental masturbation around monk mode and this grind set stuff. But it does take a period of time like that. And like I said, 10 months or so at a startup working 7 to 5. Then I'd work on this in the morning, at night, all weekend. So like I lived in an apartment for a year, basically, not really doing too much adventuring. And I think the human spirit craves a little bit of expansion and experience. So my time came, and that was the product of this past trip. And then I had such a good time that I certainly see myself going back for sure.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. I think that particularly when it comes to meeting people who are in similar identities that you either now want to prescribe yourself to, or even are further along on their journeys, I truly believe that the attitude that essentially you do need to go into a hole and come out 10 years later, and that's how you'll be successful, is shooting yourself in the foot. I think that I like the term that you use, quantum leap. I think that there are people where it'll be a conversation at a coffee shop that can literally alter the course of your life. And so putting yourself in as many scenarios where that's possible, I think, is really what you need to do to make sure that you have all of the strings to pull on, because you don't know which one will have the biggest outcome. Yes,
dude. And I heard this phrase recently, which I kind of like, which is like entropy maxing. And somebody's like, the frame is that when you're in your early 20s, trying to assess what your thing may be, the direction you might go with your life, the thing you should be maximizing or optimizing for is not yet things like mastery in one vertical, but putting yourself in as many different environments and exposing yourself to different skills and experiences and data sets, books, podcasts, et cetera, just giving yourself enough information that you're allowing entropy in the universe, God, whatever, to work in your favor and give you that random serendipitous encounter with the person who's like, I really like your attitude. I have this position at a startup. I was looking for a software engineer. Like, do you want to go build a $100 million business? Boom, your life's changed forever. Or you go to you're walking through the park and you hear music, you follow the music, and you're like, then you fall into this new school of religion and it completely changes your belief set. Like, just all kinds of crazy different things if you just continue to explore with an open mind and are pursuing, I guess, entropy, right? Like, you're allowing for the magic of the universe to work in your favor by exposing yourself and putting yourself out there.
That's such a good way to lead into what I think you try and teach, but also, I don't know if you would use the term teach, but I want to hear more about the Vitruvian Program. Who's your sort of ideal candidate, but then also what can they really expect to get out of it? Like, if someone's asking, is that right for me? What would you say?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I like that you caught the teacher word, and words are super important to me. I talk about the words that we use a lot. Because I think that we're constantly, and this is an idea I took from like the 4 agreements, but we're like casting spells with the words that we say. Like we're constantly forming reality, whether it be the things I say to you that forms your unconscious beliefs about yourself, or more importantly, the words that I use to describe myself and how that's affecting me. And it's one of the harder questions I have had to ask, and it's an important one to answer over and over and over. Like you get on a sales call with somebody like, okay, why you, right? Like, why should I buy in? And the answer I've always given is that I will never claim to be coach, guru. It's not in my Instagram bio, even though that would make my business more effective if I was really clear, like I help X with X, do X. I don't want to be a coach. I'm not a monk. I'm not a guru. I'm not a teacher, but I'm always going to claim to just be another man in the arena doing the same thing. I was doing these personal practices for my personal life before I told anyone about it, before it ever brought me $1. I would be doing it if I wasn't putting content out, if I wasn't getting paid. I just have, through the advent of the time that we live in, married the two. And I feel I literally have to pinch myself every day that I get to say something like that. That being said, I'm just really, really passionate about it. I think that my gift to give the world is helping other people find theirs. I have this tendency, and even when I like write the script in retrospect and look back, like the leadership roles I've taken, captain of the team, president of the fraternity, blah, blah, blah. Like, what was I doing? Like, what was I trying to seek out? And ultimately, I was trying to pull the best out of those people as possible, whether it's the guys on the sideline, on the field, or in my fraternity, the guys amongst my cabinet, or even below me, trying to inspire those guys. So with the program specifically, like I alluded to, it's holistic self-mastery. Across the 12 weeks, you're nurturing what I call the 3 Vitruvian identities, that being warrior, philosopher, and artist. So those are the 3 through lines that are represented across the 12 weeks. And each one of those is kind of a larger bucket of this holistic idea, right? So warrior is your physical body, your physical systems, routine, discipline, etc. Everybody, I think at the core of self-mastery, like a man has to take domain over his physical body, but nobody wants to meet the guy who's super shredded, but he only talks about the protein in his next meal. And I think that because we have the ability to be a lot, I think that calls forth the duty to do so. So the other 2 through lines are philosopher, where you're kind of developing your philosophy of self, curating that self-awareness, building out mental models that are useful for you, setting goals, intentions, etc. And then that final section is artist. Like, how do you shift from a consumer to a creator and figure out whether you are a content creator or just somebody in the world? Like, I think we all have a gift to give the world, and figuring out how you can navigate the world and enter into a place where you are giving your gift, you're living a life of fulfillment, purpose, a lot of these buzzwords, in a systematic way. Because like biting off what's my purpose, that's a huge aqueous space. But having an actual system to kind of march yourself directionally closer, I think is very helpful. As far as who I'm looking for, I don't hold the gates to anyone who is curious. I love to just talk. So if anyone's curious, message me. But I certainly think that it is best fit for that kind of younger male individual, 18 to 25, 26, who is sitting there thinking like, I know I'm meant for more. I just don't necessarily know what that looks like. I kind of have this sense where I feel like I'm stuck. I don't know what that next step is. And I know I need a little bit of structure, a little bit of accountability, a community, all of those things. So yeah, that's what I would say.
That sounds, yeah. I think that a lot of people can find value in that. And my understanding is that a lot of people already have. And I think that what I'm about to say is probably a challenge that you get sometimes. I know I've been on the internet long enough to know the type of things that people find criticism in. And I think that personally, it would be hard for me to find fault in a lot of the things you just said, because yeah, getting better is something that everybody could be better at, right? Getting better at yourself. Yeah. But I'm sure people would say, okay, you're a 24-year-old dude, privileged, and haven't really done a whole lot. Mm-hmm. What are your qualifications to be able to say this is how to, better yourself?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm smiling for those that are just listening, because like I do think that it is when I hear questions like that, you can immediately start to hear kind of the limiting beliefs that are like forming below that. And I've had to answer that question before on sales calls. I think that like what's awesome about, I guess, my personal position is that I'm really not looking to scam or sell or push products. Like, I'm not trying to scale in any sort of rapid way where I'm trying to like market to the masses or convince young kids to spend money they don't have. Like, I'm simply looking for the people who are interested in working with myself, are curious about the frameworks that I've developed, want to be a part of my community, and are ready to make that step for themselves. As far as personal qualifications, like that really does need to be assessed by the individual. Like if they think that I am in a place where I can demonstrate competence through my communication, they're interested in my level of fitness, lifestyle, et cetera, like I guess I am the product that speaks for the program. And then additionally, as more and more people go through, there are actual case studies of it working for other people. And again, I say it in week one, like the keys to the universe are within you. I don't have like a special system that's going to change your life. I'm just helping you unlock what is already within you. So yeah, to me, it's like, I just answer with like as much vulnerability and like kind of back foot, hands off, where it's like, dude, if you don't want it, I'm not here to convince you. And that's kind of the only way I feel comfortable operating in what is kind of a grifter space, which is like the online course, the whatever, because it unfortunately has been sullied by so many people who are just trying to make that quick buck off of their audience. And I have come from a different position where I've built the program in parallel to also building the audience. So it's kind of been a story we shared together. And because it is paired from my end with a lot of like love and positive intention, I'm just looking for the people who are interested in me, in joining our community. And I think time will tell.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great response. I think that fully saying, hey, if you feel it's not right for you, I'm not going to sit here and try and bend over backwards to get you to buy it. I deal with some similar complaints or criticisms that essentially, because I will profess about stuff that I've learned throughout my own life, and people will say, well, you've barely lived any life, and I don't think that wisdom or self-understanding, I obviously you learn more the more you live, but there are 40 and 50-year-olds who are a shell of how defined we are as human beings. But conversely, I think there's probably 18, 19-year-old men out there who are further along than we are. I don't think that age is the be all end all for finding that, and more importantly, being able to effectively communicate how you did it to other people. I think that's really the gift, if you want to call it, that we share, which is, hey, this is me, this is what I'm doing. And, because, 18 to there, you would be hard pressed to say that the young men of today aren't having some kind of identity crisis, right? I think it's in the data, it's in the media, it's everywhere. And so I think that being able to share that, and people might criticize, but the young man who listens and who says, this is exactly what I need, then that's all you really need, right? You're not going to sift through all the gobbledygook to say, oh no, is it really worth it? Because when you get a message that says, things are going so much better, I finally feel like I'm on the right track, that's what I do it for. And I'm sure that's something you can share.
Exactly, dude. And like, I love that you said that, because it goes back to the memento mori thing. Like, if your life can positively impact one other person and then your time is called, your life is forfeit, and it has been as a lived sacrifice for that person to go on. Like, I have massive aspirations, like really, really big dreams and visions for my life. But if that is not in the cards for what ends up being the existing reality, like if one of the people that I've touched with one piece of content goes on to then build the thing that changes the world, then I change the world through them. And so, yeah, whether it's 1 or 1,000 or 100,000 or 100 million, that's what's beneficial about content, is it's a massive like leverage arm. But it's the one kid that DMs you and was like, I went to X university because of you, or I changed my major, or I quit my job. Like, and then in the context that I have, it's like showing up on weekly calls, watching people change their attitude, the way they talk about themselves, defeat vice, all of these different things. I mean, it's extremely empowering. And so when I hear those beliefs from like the naysayers of the crowd, it's like, it just falls kind of on deaf ears, because I know that they're just projecting the self-hate that they have for themselves and the fear and all that stuff. And I am empathetic to that place because I've been there before. And I would just, exactly, like wisdom is not earned in years. It is with like intention and actually learning, i.e. same input, different response, and like changing over time. And we've pursued with kind of like active aggression, learning and empowering ourselves through podcasts, through mentorships, through reading, all of these different things, podcasts. I don't know if I just double said that, but I think it's extremely nonlinear, this like wisdom term. And if you take it from like the great thinkers, I think it was Aristotle or Socrates, like the only thing that I know is that I know nothing. If you live life as an eternal student and think that the child has as much to teach me as the university professor or the guru and the monk, then I think life becomes really expansive, because there is wisdom in the child. There is wisdom in the peer. There is wisdom in the mentor. And if you're just looking for truth and you're just looking to expand yourself without putting labels, without like stratifying it all, you make quantum leaps, and your life really does get a lot better.
Absolutely. And that leads into the next topic I want to talk about, which is, from an outside perspective, a lot of people will look at us, and this is, again, not to gloat, not to put us on a pedestal, and say that we have it figured out, or at least like we seem like we do. And I'm wondering if you have any words of wisdom on, because I've talked about this and I would like to unpack it here, essentially finding your purpose, and particularly in your 20s, because I think that's the one where the way I described it is you have the widest funnel in terms of the highest highs you could achieve and the lowest lows. And every year, especially once you start tacking on responsibilities, wife, kids, etc., that it starts to narrow a little bit, the funnel. And so for someone who is either 18, 19, or just turned 20, and they feel kind of aimless, I'm wondering if you have any wisdom on trying to navigate that, at least the first step.
Yeah, 100%. So I have a whole week in my program on purpose, week 8, and an important delineation, like we talked about, defining terms is important. Purpose is a big one. It's pretty aqueous. So one thing I like to stratify, and a framework I use, is inner and outer purpose. And the way I describe it is kind of like you have a wheel and there's a pin in the center and then all these spokes in the outer ring. So outer purpose is what you're sort of alluding to, and I think a lot of people, which is the what that you are doing. What is my thing? And across your life, each different sprocket and outer ring changes. The what changes. At one point you were an elementary student, and then you were a middle schooler, and then you were a high schooler, and maybe now you started to be a student athlete. Then you went to university and you studied X, Y, and Z, and then you got your job and you did that. And then one day you're a father, and then one day you're a grandfather. And anything in between, right? So there's a lot of different whats, but tied to all of those, at the center pin is the who you are being and becoming throughout that process. And just like the pin or the center sprocket of the wheel like is getting added onto with all of those different things, you are also growing and evolving across the entirety of your life. I think there's a lot of pressure on young people given social media and some of these characters that are like really marketing themselves and accomplishing a lot in the physical world and showing it off, like an Iman Gadzhi, who's like a very zeitgeist character who I'll use, right? He's like 22, multiple millionaire, lives a very extravagant external lifestyle. And it's hard to look at that and then be the kid who's older, say, than Iman, like you and I. And it's like, fuck, dude, like I haven't made my first million, nonetheless, 10 million, 20 million. And if you play the comparison game, like I'll never be a better Iman than Iman. I'll never be a better Carter than Carter, but you'll also never be a better Zach than Zach. I would smoke you in that game. And so that's my encouragement in my world, is that like focus entirely on who you are becoming and follow the things that are genuinely interesting to yourself, and get away from the word like should. I should have it figured out more. Like life is constantly unfolding perfectly for you, and you're exactly where you need to be. Now, this is getting like a little mushy and like woo-woo. It's like, okay, Zach, nice, but I still don't feel fulfilled. I still don't know what to study, where to go. So then there is like some tactical stuff that you can do. And a lot of that comes through like journaling exercises and like prompting yourself. And I'm big on journaling because the thoughts that are running in our head, they're very hard to pin down. We think we have a good grasp, but there's a ton of dialogue running in there, right? Like, what is he thinking of me? Who said what? All these things. But if you ask yourself a question and then write it down, and then the answer's looking there and you read it back, you're like, shit, I had no idea I thought about that way for relationships or money or girls or whatever. And then you can assess whether that belief set is serving you, in the same way with goal setting and all these things. So I'm really bullish on that. I have specific stuff I've talked about for finding purpose. I did a podcast on like Ikigai. That's a very zeitgeist and popular framework. I think it's a useful exercise. I encourage everyone to go through it at least one time. I did that exercise during my senior year when I was in a similar spot. Like, what am I doing? Like, I'm staring down the barrel of like graduating and taking a job at a company that like is well paying and all these things. But like I don't know where I'm doing. Like what I'm 20, what am I going to do? Like 21, 22, 23. So stuff like that. Like I encourage people, if they haven't done the Ikigai exercise, do something like that and start to curate that sense of self-awareness, but be forgiving to yourself and like stop placing extra judgment on I should be here or I should know. Cause there are like people online who seem to have it figured out. That's actually why I want to get my platform really, really large, is just to get to the top of the mountain with all these other characters. And I'm not going to name drop, but like, especially going to Bali, you start to meet some of these people and they're not who they say they are. And they're putting out this face, but they're just as lost as the rest of us. I want to get to the top of the mountain, have all the money. Cause like right now it sounds like cope, right? Like, nice dude, you don't have $100 million. Like you can't say it, but I want to get there and be like, yes. And it still didn't make me happy. It still didn't solve my internal issues. We all have the same thing. We're still dealing with insecurity. We're healing our child wounds, all these things, just so that everyone can feel seen and heard. So yeah, a bit tangential, but
no, that's great. I think that what I really like is your focus on the internal work. Cause I do think that when you are that lost individual, doesn't matter what age, and that's where the term mental masturbation comes in. It can be very rewarding to just listen to all the things that you think you should be doing, you know, whether it is Alex Hormozy or Iman Gadzhi or whatever, and think, okay, and then you can just kind of prescribe your identity and upon the podcast you're listening to, the YouTube video you're watching, and without actually doing that internal work, you are doing something that is no different than the kid who is going to college because his dad told him to. You know, that it's the exact same thing. You're just hearing it from a different voice. And so I think that being able to really focus on the inner purpose and who you are, what you're trying to be, I think that's huge. And that's something that is essentially a different wording of what I was trying to say with living with intent, because, you know, I know personally people who are incredibly wealthy and are very broken people. And that's a trope that's played out. And yet some people still think that, but if I had that money, all my problems would be solved.
Right. Yeah. And I've gone back and forth on this in my head. Like I've asked multiple guests before, varying degrees of success. Like, do you think that you have to drive the proverbial Ferrari to find out that you can still be sad in said Ferrari? And you can extrapolate that to financial success, attaining a lot of success in the dating field, whatever it is, like the thing that you're trying to be like, oh, I want to become the man, just to find out that it doesn't fill the you-sized hole that you're trying to put women or money or cars into. And I don't know. I don't, it's obviously different for each person. And I think some people learn the lesson and will only learn the lesson through like that pain, that hard experience. They have to get to the thing to then find out. I think there's some subset of the population, I suppose I fall into, where we can like take the wisdom of others and be like, all right, I'm seeing enough people say the same thing. I'm just going to take on their word that it's probably not going to fill my cup. So I'm going to fill it along the path to also getting those physical things. But I don't know. I do think that there's something in the human nature that is a little bit self-defeating, and we do need to kind of like bash into the walls a little bit to learn.
A story that I really like, I believe it was in Discipline is Destiny by Ryan Holiday, and he discusses the person who was a member of Metallica that then got kicked out and went on to found another platinum selling super successful band, but was miserable his entire life because he never could reach the same level of success out of the band that he was kicked out of. And then he compares it with a member of the Beatles who was kicked out and went on to build a family and was more fulfilled that way. And I think the lesson that I took from that is that there's always going to be the person that you can compare yourself to. The proverbial Ferrari can turn into the proverbial Maserati, can turn into the proverbial, etc. And I think that, yes, I agree with you that there is some truth that maybe you need to experience some level of it, but there's also always the next step that you could say, but I'll be happy when this happens, but I'll be happy when this happens, because if you say it's 10 million, it can become 50 million. And so I think that without ever doing that internal work, then there's no shot that you'll get the thing and be like, I'm done.
Yeah. The concept you're referring to, I heard this term, I think it was Chris Williamson, but it's called like the hedonic treadmill. And it's a belt that continues to feed itself, and you can continue to pour whatever toxic thing you want on top of it. Sometimes it's really toxic, like substances or misused, like unconscious, unhealthy sexual encounters. But maybe it's more of cars or investments or businesses. And I think we're even seeing that with some of the characters that we've kind of loosely alluded to and discussed. Like you can keep scaling the business to whatever, dude. There's gonna be the world. We're printing money every day. There's just more in circulation that it can get bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's called the hedonic treadmill forever, or for a reason, because you can walk the treadmill forever and ever. It never runs out of belt. But yeah, being aware of the treadmill, bringing your awareness to that, oh shit, there's a treadmill here. And then just opting off and then taking a walk along your life's path, I think is a much more efficacious route. It's at least more interesting because everybody's been on the treadmill for an hour and been like, wow, I'm still here just sweating. But if you're going to sweat for it, I think you should go take a stroll through life and maybe see some sights.
Yeah. Yeah. We've already alluded to the sort of red pill type movement. I think that we both try and distance ourselves from it, which I think is good. And I think that there is actually a bit of a counterculture of people within the particularly male self-improvement space that are pointing at that and saying, this is not what we agree with. And unfortunately, like with most ideologies or things like that, they get a couple stuff right. I think that, I won't even say a broken clock is right twice a day, but I think that they do talk about, physical fitness and aspiring to be not average. I think that those I would agree with. And then they kind of go off the rails, at least some of them. And so I'm wondering if someone were to compare you to, that space, whether it is manosphere or red pill, what is your sort of response to either distance yourself or what I just said?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I mean, there's some subsect of people that are going to observe you and just see that you are a male talking about anything online and just be like, you're a misogynist. So like, we just have to deal with that. But for the people that are like exploring it and trying to like sift through content, I think one, being very intentional, I like that word a lot, with the content that you put out. I've chosen not to get too far into the weeds of like, dating dynamics, sexual psychology, all that stuff. Even though I find it very fascinating, I've had to learn a lot for myself in my personal life. I'm kind of wading into those waters slowly now, through having female guests on the podcast, because I think nuance is important on both sides of the conversation. And so that's my answer, is nuance. I think that the reason that the red pill space is flawed is because they're really great marketers in that they are clear, they choose one really polarizing view and then amplify it really loud. The downside is that on the receiving end, the people who are consuming that content take that as gospel and don't provide nuance in their personal life. And ultimately that affects typically another person, because we're talking about the relationship space. So for myself, like I even made the intentional decision because for a while I was under the moniker of like the Vitruvian man, but I've stepped away and just the Vitruvian because of that reason. Like I see this, specifically the podcast, scaling on a very long time horizon, like relatively large. And I don't want to be, even upon namesake alone, just limited by that. And people think that this is just another red pill, men's self-development, whatever. It's bigger than that. It always has been. And so, yeah, trying to use really targeted language, and yeah, like providing nuance. And I think that anyone, like I feel very self-assured that if they actually took the time to listen to all the content or listen to any of it at length, they couldn't find a place where it's really, really flawed. Because I never take any of those inflammatory stances, because I just don't think it's productive for me, for the audience, for anyone. And while that may cost me a tremendous amount of money in the marketing space, like that's something that I'm willing to live with at the cost of my soul and everything else.
No, I think that the topic of nuance, I think, is super important. I think that in general, absolutes are incredibly dangerous. I think that you should still be able to generalize. And I think that's where maybe the other side of the coin, if you want to call it that, gets it wrong, is when you say that each individual is so different, you can't make any generalizations about what women like or what men like or how this tends to play out. I think that you also lose a lot of context there that's actually very important. But on the side that we're at least criticizing at the moment, I think that, yeah, that when you talk in pure absolutes, this is the way that it is. You need to do this, that, and the other to get this, that, and the other. It's just super dangerous. I think that it creates not only, I love how now I'm going to be a bit more abrupt in my criticism of it. The sheep terminology I find hilarious, because I think that the people who do treat it as gospel are sheep of the other herd. Like absolutely.
Yeah,
If you do not listen to anybody but the 3 people who you really like, who you think are always telling the truth, and call everybody else sheep, you need to look in a mirror.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I mean, it's like all of the things that we talk about, even with self-development, like it's law of large numbers. Like it works out because most people, when they do X, Y, and Z behavior, behave X, Y, and Z way. Yeah, exactly. And like even that is a nuanced stance. We're providing nuance upon the meta subjects that we're talking about. It's getting a little bit out there, but yeah, no, it's people lacking the, again, self-awareness, the ability to separate from themselves and their own viewpoint. They're just very down in the weeds. Like I am X, Y, and Z person, and I identify with this group, and they're my tribe, and they're whatever. So you're fighting against a lot of stuff, evolutionary psychology, whatever. Like we want to put things in nice little labeled boxes. We want to put ourselves in people groups and be able to stratify. And so for those people who are that younger man who's lost, like the unfortunate reality is if they're looking for their people, they can find that sense of community. It's just unfortunate that a lot of the leaders in the space, at least leading up till now, I think we're seeing, like you said, a bit of a renaissance, a bit of a turn, a counterculture to the counterculture. Some of those leaders do not necessarily have the best interests at heart of those younger men who are just trying to figure themselves out, figure the dating dynamics out. And, I dream of a reality where you and I can't build a podcast or a business like this because the dads are just raising their sons the right fucking way, right? Like we should be entirely replaced. And that's hopefully what we are doing, is like our sons will be raised as to be great fathers. The younger men that we inspire or work with or whatever will also go on to just be really well self-actualized men that can lead by example. And then that's that. And then we just actually have a culture that's functioning and people are okay. But who knows what the future will look like?
No, I also dream of similar things. Just as last piece of advice, kind of what we just talked about. Mm-hmm. If you are somebody who finds yourself watching some of those stuff, I would just say, think about nuance. Think about how there are no absolutes. And if you only watch one type of content or only listen to one type of content, branch out a little bit with open ears. Otherwise, you'll be trying to poke holes in their side, no matter even if they are there or aren't there. There are probably holes on your side. I think that everyone would benefit from listening to the other side of the table. I think that we've kind of become isolated and a bit extremified on both sides. And I think that that's where a lot of the dangers and the dissent among even like male-female interpersonal relationships, I think a lot of that is because of those spaces that have grown so large on either coin.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's like another helpful heuristic for people if they're like in a place where it's like, okay, well, who do I listen to? Like, do I listen to Zach and Carter? Do I listen to Mr. T and the gang? Like, who do I pick? I really think like a good thing is just like look at what they have as outcomes. And if you don't want that life, like, then opt out. Like some of like the big players, I don't know how to do the online call out thing, but like some of these guys are 50, divorced, don't have a successful marriage, relationship, family, et cetera. And they're talking about how to build successful relationship, family, et cetera. Like you run the numbers on that. For me, it's like, maybe that isn't the guy who I'm going to take advice from. And I also think that look in your immediate community. Like it's helpful to get large sets of data from like leaders and thought leaders online. But there are people in your local area. Like if you don't have the family unit at home, which a lot of us, some of us are privileged to have, some of us wish was slightly different. Like it's complicated. Family is complicated for all of us. But if your dad wasn't the dad that you wanted, or you don't have a dad to look to, there are men and mentors who are able and willing in your community, whether it be sports coaches or some sort of club that you access or just walk around at a local community, like reach out, and those people will be more real, more invested in your life than any internet person that's going to sell you, ironically, a course or whatever it is. So try to bring those people into your real life, somebody that can be a mentor. And allow yourself some nuance. Don't rush to conclusions, et cetera, et cetera.
I think that's great advice. We're right about at the hour mark. I want to ask you, what's on the horizon for Zach? What's on the horizon for the Vitruvian? Any projects or things you'd like to shout out specifically?
Yeah. So, I mean, the most exciting thing is just more of the same. So I'm going to continue to push out more of the podcast, have a lot of really excellent guests, going to continue to hopefully be traveling in the new year for some of those guests, whether it's contiguous US or around the world. Continue to develop myself so that I can be the best product and teacher to the people that are listening, sharing more and more of those insights. And a new version or piece of content that I'm going to be exploring with is I'm releasing kind of a behind the brand type vlog. Some of the people that inspire me the most and that I look up to, a few names being like Stephen Bartlett with Diary of a CEO, George Heaton with Represent. They're a fashion company, unrelated niche, but a lot of the people that I'm looking up to that have built massively successful businesses also are sharing kind of the vulnerable side and are vlogging the process there. And I think that with the goals that I have for myself, how long I intend to stay in the game, I think it would be cool to tell the narrative behind the scenes a little bit more. So first one will be dropping sometime soon. I don't know when this comes out, but in the next few weeks, I'll be editing the first episode, which starts back with my trip in Bali and carries through Australia and Thailand. Currently in the process of filming the next one. And so I'm just going to be telling a little bit more of my story on YouTube, which I think would be really, really cool as a new medium of content or form of content. But yeah, so just continuing more of the same, connecting with cool people, sharing the same message, and then learning along the way.
Awesome, Zach. That's all of your links will be in the description. Go check Zach out. Go subscribe to all of his stuff. I want to thank you again for having on the I want to thank you again for coming on the show.
Of course, bro. Thank you so much for sharing the time, the space, and of course, your audience with me. I hope that you guys found one thing valuable, one turn of phrase, one concept. And if anything I said is something that you're curious about, message me. I'm currently the only person in all of my socials. So I'm in the DMs all the time. I literally love to talk to people, provide value where I can. So yeah, don't let the conversation stop here.
All righty. Thanks everybody for watching.